All right. Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to our first Sudozi Finance Friday of 2023. I was going to say 2013, definitely not 2013. Every Friday, we speak with a strategic finance professional to share a little bit more about what's going on in the world of budgeting, macro environments, VC, fundraising, all that good stuff. Today, we are so excited to have Karen Zelby join us. She is the VP of Finance and Operations at Sisu Data. Welcome, Karen.
Thanks, Rose. Excited to be here with you and love Finance Fridays.
Yeah, thanks. All right, so we always start these things kind of going back to the beginning a little bit. You were at Michigan. What did you think about finance and accounting at that point, and what got you convinced that going to PwC was the right first move out of school?
Yeah, so go blue. I went to Michigan. I was in the business school. And it was kind of funny when I was going through the business school, most people want to do investment banking or consulting. I was beelining towards accounting. I don't know, growing up, I guess I just knew I wanted to be an accountant. And so that was really my focus, from early on, and kind of when you start to do those casual interviews and meeting different firms, I was really focused kind of on the big four. And I started my career there. I thought I was going to kind of end up being a partner at the big four. And I love my experience at PwC. I mean, it was amazing. At 22, you get to be in meetings with CFOs of public companies.
Totally.
And so really great foundation, got to work with some amazing people. And I think for me, though, I felt like I hit a bit of a plateau in the first few years. And so that was kind of, for me, what made me realize that it was kind of time to move beyond and kind of see what else is out there.
And share a little bit about that transition from PwC to KPMG. Was it you reaching out to a specific team? Were they recruiting for someone to oversee that function that you managed? How was that transition?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was in Chicago at the time. It was very cold, didn't get above zero for a whole week. And so I think a part of it was also, thinking about what the next career opportunity was, and also thinking about maybe, is there a different location that I'd want to be in? And so I started talking to a number of different companies, both in industry and, other big firms. And ultimately ended up getting connected with KPMG's M&A due diligence group based in San Francisco. And so I think a part of it was just, there was an awesome opportunity to move to San Francisco at that time. And I really liked the idea of kind of taking what I'd learned in accounting and building those financial skills on top of it. And that's really kind of why I ended up taking that KPMG opportunity.
Awesome. So you're in San Francisco, you're starting with a new group, new company.
Yeah.
Share a little bit about what are some of the technical and maybe relationship differences in that role compared to your first one?
Yeah, I mean, I loved both of the PwC and KPMG experiences, particularly early in my career, because it's very project-based. So you would go from project to project, see different companies. And the beauty of that is you get so much exposure to a number of different things really quickly. And so that was kind of one of the favorite aspects of both of those opportunities. With KPMG, it was really great because I think one of the biggest foundational skills that I learned that I've carried into kind of my further roles is around kind of financial modeling. So accounting kind of taught me the foundational basics of debits and credits,
Totally.
and how to balance a balance sheet. And then with KPMG, I could really apply that, but in a financial modeling sense, understanding how you lay out data to make sure that it can tell the story of the business. And so I got a lot of repetition of that practice.
Yeah, and in that group in particular, any sort of function related to M&A, there's always a lot of high stress, potentially tight deadlines. Any crazy stories that you'd care to share? Maybe you learned one thing or two, or maybe just a fun story to share with the audience.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. I mean, I think when you're in a services industry, you're kind of at ultimately the whim of kind of your client and making sure you're going above and beyond. And with M&A, there's inherently tight deadlines. I remember one time I was at my sister's graduation, I literally had my laptop in the audience, just working on the deal and making sure she got graduated.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you remember if you were modeling or just packaging up emails and sending those off?
There was some sort of data analysis, so kind of multitasking at its finest.
Amazing. Amazing. All right. So you're at KPMG working on tight deadlines and maybe looking over and saying, oh, this tech role isn't too bad. What were some of the triggers and what were you trying to learn as you transitioned over to Eden, which was the next role that you had?
Yeah. So I think similarly, ultimately I've kind of learned my North Star is learning and growing. And so for me, that's kind of when I feel like I'm not being pushed to learn and grow. That's kind of when I'll start thinking, okay, what might be the next opportunity to take? And it's interesting because, coming from Chicago, I didn't really hear a lot about the startup ecosystem at that time. And when I moved to San Francisco, you talk to somebody and say you're in finance and they're like, all right, next. And, everyone's super excited at the time about startups and what was happening there. And so I got connected with a recruiter, and Eden actually was the first company I talked to. And so for me, it was that leap. I mean, ultimately, I knew I wanted to do a startup. I think a part of that was being in KPMG's M&A group. I kind of felt like I was on the outside looking in. You got the deal done, you handed it off, and then you're not really sure what happens after that. And so for me, being in a startup is really an opportunity to own your decisions, figure out what happens after, you make that decision. And so I got connected with the Eden team, and that was really a function of just feeling like it was the right team to be surrounded by. And that proved to be true. I was there for a really long time, and I got to, I joined in a kind of nebulous biz ops role and really was surrounded by amazing people who pushed me, really trusted me, and allowed me to kind of get to experience all the different functions of the business. I pretty much tried everything there except for probably engineering.
If you were to give that version of Karen some advice, now that you have many more years of experience in both finance and operations, what would be one thing, one piece of advice that you give yourself going into that role?
Yeah, and I think I ultimately lived this, but I don't think going in I knew it. And I would give this advice to others. I would say just say yes to opportunities that present themselves. I mean, I think one of the beauties at Eden was I really got to see all the different functions of the business and learn earlier in my career kind of what I liked and what I didn't like. I got to hone in on kind of the skills that I knew I wanted to build on this finance track, but I learned a ton about operations. I got to see marketing, sales, do whatever you can, learn the different functions, and just say yes to opportunities. So that's kind of, I think, my biggest takeaway from that.
Yeah, it's almost like there are no bad opportunities. They're only opportunities that you don't fully take advantage of. Experience.
And, some might not be the right long term for you, and that's okay.
Right.
But I think seeing that through and learning that early is very helpful.
Yeah, sounds good. And then in terms of your growth at Sisu and your transition there and then growth at Sisu.
Yeah.
Share a little bit about moving into the data space and much more on the enterprise software side of things.
Yeah. So, I think when I interviewed with Sisu, they kind of went in thinking that they needed somebody with that enterprise SaaS experience. And Eden at the time was a marketplace for office services and kind of starting to transition into that SaaS space.
Yeah.
And I really didn't know a lot about enterprise SaaS, but I knew that I could learn it. And so I kind of just transparently shared that. And I think the transition was really made helpful because there was a really strong group of seasoned leaders who I can learn from. So, our sales team, we had some rev ops team members who I could learn a ton from, who had experience in the enterprise SaaS space. And then just kind of reaching out to my finance network to say hey, have you seen this? How do you think about the model in this way?
Yep.
And that was really helpful for getting up to speed quickly on kind of a new business model.
In terms of those first, 90 days, particularly on, as you mentioned, the modeling and thinking through the revenue modeling for this new, software that you're getting to know, and you're getting to know the sales team and rev ops team and other teams. What are some of the big changes you made to the model, or did you have to build a model from scratch? What was that coming in as the finance lead?
Yeah, and so I think it was interesting because I came in, and I think I came in a little hot, where it was all right, we're getting down to budgeting, and you kind of got to slow down a little bit. A lot of being a strong finance leader is building that rapport, building those relationships, so that you kind of have that trust on both sides. And so I think that was kind of one of my learnings, was just make sure you spend the time first to get that trust layer built. And we had definitely the basics of a model built, but I think kind of further developing that budget, definitely we made some changes to kind of our revenue side of the model, and also kind of the cost. I'm a big fan of getting pretty deep in the weeds on the financial model and building up in a very detailed level. And so I kind of worked with each department at that point to kind of build up that model in a detailed way.
Got it. Yeah. I actually don't know. What was earlier stage when you joined? Was it Eden or Sisu?
Eden. I joined
Go
Eden
ahead.
at seed stage. It was about 15
Oh,
people.
wow. Okay. Got it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a lot
So,
of fun.
awesome. And so, okay. So here you're at Sisu, you're realizing, hey, maybe I want to build the relationships and then roll out the budgets after, getting pretty in the weeds on some of the vendors that you all are using, the contracts that you have. And my understanding is you wear multiple hats at the company. So share a little bit more about how those roles evolved in terms of, did you just sort of naturally acquire those roles? Was there explicit, transitions or decisions made in the company? How did you, which roles do you cover, and what's that like?
Yeah. So I think that's one of my favorite aspects of finance in an early stage company, because you have the opportunity to own a lot of different functions and really support the organization in a lot of different ways. And so I knew going in that I would be owning finance. And I think over time I've kind of, gotten the opportunity to work in other areas. And so with that, it was kind of finance, accounting, legal to start. And then there was an opportunity with our people operations, so people ops and recruiting. So I oversee those functions now and have amazing team members on that function. And then analytics as well was kind of one that rolled over, and generally the operations of the business. So as we've grown, there just become new operational complexities, making sure our exec team meetings are running, that we have all the kind of different checkpoints and operational processes running, and continuing to evolve that as we've evolved as a company.
Yeah, one of the questions that I had was, as you're owning these different departments, do you ever have debates with yourself? Like, if there were multiple leads, what would those debates actually look like? And do you hold them with someone else, or how do you resolve some of the debates between departments?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And I think where I felt this most acutely was probably in recruiting, because I had never historically owned a function that ultimately has a numerical output to it. I mean, recruiting is similar to sales, right? You have your funnel and you have a goal that you have to hit. And to achieve that, you need to have specific costs, and you have to have the right support team members. And so on one hand, you want to make sure you're super successful on that side and have all the costs and people and everything that you need to succeed. But then on the finance side, when you're talking to all your different departments and saying, hey, this is your budget, you kind of have to balance those two. And so I try to keep myself intellectually honest on it and understand like what's the ROI of investment decisions, because I expect others to do that as well. But I have a great counterpart on the recruiting side who I really lean on to help kind of debate those sort of things and make sure that we are making the right investments.
Yeah. So speaking of budgets, it seems like now you do have department budgets to some extent, and there is some accountability. It might vary by different categories or different department leaders. Could you share, an example of one, or how you've been able to get to that point where you do have that relationship and that trust between the department leader and finance to have that budget both agreed on, as well as you're executing towards that budget?
Yeah. I think we've gotten in a pretty good rhythm as a team. And I think one of the best things to do at the start is really zoom out with the exec team and align on what are your goals as a business. That way, when you're kind of talking the macro to say, here's what we want to achieve in what order, it's then easy to say, this is why our costs are allocated in this way. And make sure you're kind of having that high level discussion, any disagreements first, because then when you go to the teams, they really understand where their budget's coming from. And I think, I'm fortunate to work with really experienced team members. And so I try to give them a lot of autonomy and be a partner in how they're thinking through their budget, give them historical information, and really kind of work through as a team how we achieve our goals. And then hold ourselves accountable, measuring budgets to actuals, like where did things change, and that's okay. But just kind of making sure we're circling back on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in terms of, you mentioned budget versus actuals, other data sharing, maybe stepping back from Sisu. But yeah, your thoughts on tooling and automation in finance and accounting. I know there's been a lot these past few years in this space. Any thoughts or just general excitement for the space, or lack of excitement? You love Excel. How's that going? How's all the automation coming for you?
I gotta say, I do love Excel. I will ultimately forever love Excel, but I'm excited. I do feel like, increasingly so, there's a number of interesting finance tools, as being one of them, that are kind of coming out. And I think the way I think about it is like, where do I feel the pain? Like, I will only make the investment when I have like come across the pain. I mean, there are times you have to think ahead, but I really like to kind of make sure that like it is a need that we have. and making sure that those investments are stage appropriate. And so ultimately, we'll need to be on NetSuite, but QuickBooks is just okay for right now. So just making sure you're kind of seeing around the corner, knowing what's out there, but making those appropriate investment decisions.
Absolutely. All right. Let's jump by quickly. Coming into the last minute or two here. Quick plug for Sisu. What are you guys building? What are you up to? And then love to hear a fun fact about you. Anything you'd like to share going into the new year?
Yeah. So Sisu Data is a data analytics platform. And so if you kind of think about today, you might be using your Looker Tableau dashboard and you see your revenue change by 4%. And then you go to your analyst and say, hey, why did this change 4%? And the analyst has to slice and dice that data. What Sisu can do with ML algorithms is really quickly give you the answer on why your metrics are changing. And we recently announced a partnership with Google, and shortly we'll be launching an integration with Looker. So Sisu will actually be embedded in that. We have our app experience, and it can embed in any third-party tool, really. So a very powerful way to understand why data is changing within your business.
Absolutely. Go Sisu, and getting those insights across the whole business funnel and metrics and all the data that's out there.
Yeah.
And then how about you, Karen? What are you excited for this new year?
This year, I'm excited to continue to travel. We've been a bit nomadic since the pandemic and just continuing to enjoy our life. So that's kind of big excitement on our horizon.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. I'm excited. Every time I catch up with Karen, it almost feels like it's a different location. So it's fun to follow her journey as well. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and best of luck with month year-end close and all of those fun activities in Q1.
Thank you. Good to see you.
All right.
Have a good one. Bye.